Welcome back. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi hosted on Monday a tripartite summit, Jordanian monarch Abdullah II and Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in New Al Alamein city to discuss the latest developments in the Palestinian territories. In the final declaration of the summit, the leaders affirmed their full support for the Palestinian president to defend the interests of his people at all levels and secure international protection. The details.
President Fattah al-Sisi hosted on Monday in a tripartite summit Jordanian monarch Abdullah II, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in New Alamein city to discuss latest developments in Palestinian territories. The three leaders emphasized the priority given to Arab international references for the settlement of Palestinian cause and the need to end Israeli occupation, as well as giving Palestinian people their legitimate rights. The final declaration of the summit, the leaders affirmed their full support for Palestinian president to defend interests of his people at all levels and secure international protection. They also stressed that the only means to achieve peace is to implement relevant United Nations and Security Council resolutions to establish independent and sovereign state of Palestine with East Jerusalem as its capital. In this context, President Sisi, Abdullah II and Abbas asserted the need to stop Israeli incursions into West Bank and lift the blockade on Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, the final declaration condemned the continuation and escalation of illegal Israeli practices that violate the international laws that called for two-state solution. It also rejected the violation of the legal and historical status quo in the city of Jerusalem and refused any attempts to divide Al-Aqsa Mosque. Meanwhile, the three leaders stressed their adherence to the Arab Peace Initiative with all its terms.
Speaker of the Arab Parliament Adel bin Abdurrahman Al-Assoumi hailed the outcomes of the tripartite summit. In the meantime, the one that was held on Monday in New Al Alamein city, hosted by President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and featuring Jordanian King Abdullah II and Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas Abu Mazen to discuss the Palestinian cause and the international issues related to it. Al-Assoumi stressed in a statement that the Arab Parliament's support was the final declaration of the summit, which called for ending Israeli occupation and settling the Palestinian cause on a way that is based on the two-state solution. Meanwhile, the Arab League's General Secretariat hailed Australia's decision, which deemed Israeli settlements as being illegal. The Pan-Arab organization cherished the Australian government's usage of the term occupied Palestinian territories, including Eastern Jerusalem, Al-Quds. The League referred to a statement issued by a Palestinian institution at the occupied territories, describing the move as being of a significant importance, sending a clear message of respect to the international laws and obliging the occupation authority to binding with them. Palestinian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Expatriates described the incursions carried out by the Israeli occupation of cities, towns and Palestinian camps as a war crime against humanity, considering these attacks as a result of the failure of the international community in providing international protection for the Palestinian people. Palestinian health officials said Israeli occupation forces shot and killed 2 Palestinians, including a 16-year-old, in a raid in the occupied West Bank on Tuesday. The Israeli military said troops came under fire and shot back. The Palestinian Health Ministry identified those killed as Qusay al-Walaji, 16, and Muhammad Nujum, 25. The statement added that the raid took place in the Jericho area, which has seen heavy fighting over the last 16 months. Palestinian sources said the occupation forces raided and shot fire at the Palestinians to make the number of martyrs stand at 11. The occupation forces also arrested 17 Palestinians in sporadic areas in the West Bank. Still with Palestine-related news, dozens of Israeli settlers stormed the Holy Al-Aqsa Mosque from Al-Magharba Gate under heavy protection from Israeli occupation forces. The settlers carried out provocative rounds in Al-Aqsa yards and carried out Talmudic rituals. Meanwhile, the Palestinian Authority for Detainees and Released Affairs said that the occupation authorities had detained 170 Palestinian kids among hard detention conditions. The Palestinian Authority added that 2/3 of the detained kids are being physically tortured, while all of the detained are being psychologically tortured. You're still watching Nile TV Newsroom Live, and we are delighted now to be joined over the phone by Ambassador Gamal Bayoumi, former Assistant Foreign Minister. Ambassador Bayoumi, a very good evening to you. Thank you for joining us. And sir, President al-Sisi hosted on Monday in a tripartite summit the Jordanian monarch and the Palestinian presidents to discuss the latest developments in the Palestinian territories. How do you see this meeting, the importance, the significance and the timing in light of the situation in occupied Palestine?
Very important meeting, and the timing also is very important. We are in a sort of consultation among all the Arab countries who are in good position, because in my opinion, the Arab world is not in its very good health. We have problems in Syria, in Lebanon, in Sudan, everywhere around us, and we are trying to attend meetings like that in order to hold the mission there and try to find solutions for all our brothers and friends. As of the Palestinian question, it is on top of our priority everywhere, wherever we are. Then the Palestinian question is there. And we have several problems there. We have the difference between the Palestinian different parties. As you will know, Hamas in Gaza is separating itself from the PLO. In Israel, it's not better because Israel is a very divided country among many parties. And now we have the far right of the government in Israel. So since the establishment of Israel, we have never seen one party winning 50% of the votes. So it is always a sort of combination between far left and far right, and then you don't have people in the generation of Shimon Peres or Rabin who can conclude a serious peace treaty with the Palestinians. And now they are denying what they agreed before in Oslo with Yasser Arafat, and we are facing a trouble situation. But here comes the Palestinian position and the Palestinian resistance by staying there, not to abide to the destroying of homes or killing the Palestinians. We have to stand there. And in the coming few years, I am quite sure that the Palestinians will outnumber the Israelis in their land. That's why the friends of Israel, even in the United States, are advising them to accept the two-state solution. One state, if in the coming future, it will be with a majority of the Arab Palestinians, and with a very hostile border with Syria, with Lebanon, not very good situation with Jordan or Egypt. What a future Israel is seeking. This is the situation I think the three heads of state are discussing now. Of course, supporting the Palestinians to stay in their land, supporting them financially, supporting them by hosting thousands of Palestinians in our lands, in Jordan also is the same. So Palestine is the case. So also I think they will discuss the problems in Lebanon because it affects our position in the Arab world. Today, our foreign minister received his counterpart from Syria also.
Right.
They are trying to bring Syria, because this is a very strong country in the Arab world, and we are a little bit satisfied that Syria came back to occupy its seat in the Arab League.
Yes.
Many efforts you can watch, many efforts you can find that the Arab world is trying to bring back its unity and its possibility to face all these problems.
Indeed, a lot happening, a lot of diplomacy initiated by Cairo happening these days. Thank you very much, Ambassador Gamal Bayoumi, former Assistant Foreign Minister, for your time and your insight, sir. And as the Ambassador was referring to, at a press conference in Cairo earlier today, following the Arab Ministerial Liaison Committee meeting on Syria, Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry said the meeting focused on humanitarian issues, especially the problem of refugees and the significance of their safe return to Syria. The top diplomats stressed the significance of Syrian unity and sovereignty, as well as realizing the Syrian people's interests. He said the committee reaffirmed the significance of abiding by the international legitimacy concerning Syria, noting that the ministers had agreed on holding periodical experts meetings on the country until ending the Syrian crisis. Shoukry called on the international community and Arab countries to shoulder the responsibility towards Syria and help the country to end its crisis. He further called on resolving the Syrian crisis through a peaceful settlement and resorting to a set roadmap. Earlier, Shoukry met with his Syrian counterpart Faisal al-Miqdad, during which he asserted that the committee is keen to help solving the Syrian crisis and support the Syrian people, as well as preserve the unity and territorial integrity of Syria. And clashes broke out in the Libyan capital, Tripoli, late on Monday, and flights to the city's main airport were suspended after the reported seizure of a powerful armed faction commander by a rival force. Mahmoud Hamza, head of the 444 brigade that controls much of Tripoli, was detained at Mitigra airport by the Special Deterrence Force. All flights to and from the airport were being rerouted to Misrata, 180 kilometers to the east. Any sustained fighting between the two factions, the most powerful in the capital, after a period of military consolidation, could pose significant risks. Monday's clashes are already the worst to hit Tripoli for months, though there has been sporadic violence between armed factions in some other parts of northwestern Libya in recent weeks. Still watching Nile TV Newsroom Live, and still with Africa-related news. Niger's new leaders recalled their country's envoy in Abidjan after remarks by Côte d'Ivoire's President Alassane Ouattara that they said amounted to praising armed action against Niamey. Referring to the green light given by Niger's West African neighbors for possible armed intervention to restore democracy in the country, the military rulers denounced Ouattara's eagerness to see this, what they call this illegal and senseless aggression against Niger, come to pass. On his return from a summit of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, in Abuja, Nigeria, on Thursday, Ouattara said the heads of state had agreed a military operation should start as soon as possible. He said Côte d'Ivoire would contribute a battalion of between 850 and 1,100 troops alongside Nigeria and Benin. Europe now. Russian forces unleashed a barrage of missiles on regions across the Ukraine in the early hours of Tuesday morning, killing civilians and damaging civilian infrastructure. The details.
A barrage of Russian missiles came just hours before top Russian military officials and their counterparts from Asia, Middle East and Africa gathered outside Moscow for a security conference where the fighting in Ukraine is likely to dominate the agenda. Moscow's war in Ukraine is nearing its 18-month mark. The Ukrainian Air Force said Russia fired a total of 28 cruise missiles at the country. 16 of them were intercepted. 6 out of 7 Russian launched missiles hit the western region of Lviv, wounding 15 people. 40 buildings and houses were damaged in the region that borders Poland, including in the city of Lviv, and the power grid was also damaged. In the neighboring region of Volyn, 3 people were killed by Russian missile strike and 3 others were injured. In the southeastern region, 2 people were injured. In the region's capital, in the nearby Ivano-Frankivsk region, missile debris hit a private house. Parts of the city of Smila and the central Cherkasy region were left without access to water after Russian strikes. The attack damaged a medical facility as well as water and heat supply networks. In one of the villages of the frontline Zaporizhzhia region, a missile struck a stadium at school, damaging the facility building as well as residential houses and the kindergarten. Russian forces also hit a grocery warehouse in Kramatorsk, a city in the front line of Donetsk region in the east, killing 1 person and wounding another. The countrywide barrage came a day after Russian forces unleashed a wave of missile and drone strikes on the non-frontline region Odessa in the country's southwest. The Kremlin's forces have recently pummeled Odessa, hitting facilities that transport Ukraine's crucial grain exports and also wrecking cherished Ukrainian historical sites. The repeated attacks on Odessa follow Moscow's decision to break off a landmark agreement that had allowed grain to flow from Ukraine to countries in Africa, Middle East and Asia and help reduce the threat of hunger.
With us now live over the phone is Dr. Sharif Amir, Professor of International Relations. A very good evening to you, Dr. Amir, and thank you for joining us. Now, Moscow's war in Ukraine is nearing the 18th month mark, a war that has devastated the global economy. How do you see the developments of the war, Dr. Amir?
Well, the development of this war, it's obvious now that the Russian Federation is gaining more territory, controlling more resources. The region of the Donbass, which is the region ethnically Russian, they speak Russian. It's now fully part of Russia. It's a historical part of Imperial Russia before. But that things now are being very, very clear more than ever. The Russians now are showing that they could export the grains as the owners of these lands. And they showed that to the African nations, and the Africa-Russia summit was a clear message to the West and to the whole international community that there is now a new map. There's the eastern part of Ukraine, which is a part of Russia, and many nations are accepting this. So we have all this reality in front of our eyes. Adding to that, what we heard today for the first time since the start of the special military operation in Donbass, it's a statement from NATO, which says exactly that there is an offer to Russia that if NATO would have to accept Ukraine as a member, in that case, Ukraine has to recognize these territories as part of Russia. So on the bargaining table, it's something now that is changing in the West, that they offer the recognition of these territories to Russia, and in the same time, they could include Ukraine as a member. Of course, this was not accepted by the Russians at all as an offer, because we all know that the whole problem started from the beginning that Ukraine was intending to become member of NATO, which is, as President Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, stated, existential threat to the Russian Federation, which would not be accepted or tolerated by any means. That's why the Minsk agreements, Minsk 1 and 2, were signed by even Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, that he promised they will never join NATO.
Right.
So it's obvious that things are changing on the ground.
Right. Dr. Sharif Amir, Professor of International Relations, thank you very much for your insights, sir. Thank you for your time with us. Short break here on Nile TV Newsroom Live, and we'll be back, dear viewers, so please don't go away. Welcome back. At least 35 people were killed in an explosion that created a huge fireball at a fuel station in Russia's remote Caucasus Republic of Dagestan, spurring condolences from President Putin on Tuesday. Images distributed by the Emergencies Ministry in Russia showed burnt-out cars silhouetted by the massive blaze and rescue workers in helmets attempting to put out the fire and clear the rubble. Government ministry said 35 people had died and 80 had been injured. The Kremlin issued a statement saying that President Putin expressed his most sincere condolences to the families and friends of the victims of the tragedy in Dagestan and wished them a speedy recovery. A criminal case has been opened to establish the circumstances leading up to the fire. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un called on Monday for an increase in missile production to help secure what he called the overwhelming military power and be ready for war as South Korea and the United States gear up for annual military drills. Kim gave the order as he visited key munitions factories that produce tactical missiles, missile launch platforms, armored vehicles and artillery shells on Friday and Saturday. His field inspection was the latest in a string of visits to arms factories where he ordered mass production of weapons and came days before South Korea and the US are to begin annual military drills, which Pyongyang sees as a rehearsal for war. South Korea and the US said that they would stage the Olche Freedom Guardian summer exercises on August 21st and continue until the 31st. To improve their ability to respond to North Korea's evolving nuclear and missile threats. Staying in the region, South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol said Tuesday that this week's summit with the leaders of the US and Japan will set a new milestone in trilateral cooperation in the face of North Korea's evolving nuclear and missile threats. In a speech marking the anniversary of his country's liberation from Japan's 1910-1945 colonial rule, Yoon emphasized the need to step up security cooperation with Washington and Tokyo through reconnaissance assets and real-time sharing of data on the North's nuclear weapons and missiles. Yoon said that the summit will set a new milestone in trilateral cooperation, contributing to peace and prosperity on the Korean Peninsula and in the Indo-Pacific region. Yoon is set to join US President Joe Biden and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida at the Camp David Presidential Retreat in Maryland on Friday, where they will launch a series of joint initiatives on technology, education, and defense. Weather now, at least 49 people were killed 9 of them in a temple collapse, and dozens more were feared missing after intense rains caused floods and landslides in India. Days of torrential downpours have washed away vehicles, demolished buildings, and destroyed bridges in the northern Himalayan states of Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand. Flooding and landslides are common and cause widespread devastation during India's treacherous monsoon season, but experts say climate change is increasing their frequency and severity. In Himachal Pradesh, 41 people were killed in the past 24 hours alone, up from an earlier toll of 16. That included at least 9 killed in the collapse of a Hindu temple in the state capital, Shimla. At least 13 others went missing. So with climate-related news, Hawaii's governor warned that scores more people could be found dead following the Maui wildfires as search crews go through neighborhoods where the flames galloped as fast as a mile a minute, and firefighters struggled to contain the inferno with what some officials complained was a limited water supply. The blazes that consumed most of the historic town of Lahaina are already the deadliest in the U.S. in more than a century, with a death toll of at least 100. The cause was under investigation. As cell phone service has slowly been restored, the number of people missing dropped from about 1,300 to about 1,300 from over 2,000. 20 cadaver dogs and dozens of searchers are making their way through blocks reduced to ash. With us now over the phone is Dr. Ayman Abdul Wahab, international climate expert. A very good evening to you, sir. All over the world, we are seeing the effects of the climate change, whether floods or droughts or wildfires, you name it. And we are really living the consequences of this phenomenon. Your intake, sir.
Good evening. Thank you for having me tonight. Well, actually, to start with, we have to recognize that we are getting out of the comfort zone of the global warming era to the chaotic climate change. What we are witnessing now is record-breaking temperatures in Europe that have never been recorded in this part of the world. And actually, we have to bear in mind that there are many factors that affecting, these wild and raging fires in Europe, especially in Italy, Spain, Bulgaria, and Greece, and this part of Europe, and even in Morocco and North Africa.
All around the Mediterranean, yes.
All around Mediterranean. That's right. And actually, the Mediterranean weather was famous of a moderate kind of weather,
right,
which is no longer moderate. And actually, as I mentioned, there are many factors that are affecting the severity of these wildfires. First of all, the very dry spring, the low humidity in the air, and the expanded areas of forests that are not properly managed. What I mean is that if we look at the wildfires, 85% of the reasons are man-made, and only 15% are natural reasons. So very strict measures have to be taken in this respect. And
like
it's
what,
not
Dr.
only
Ayman?
fighting the fire, but preventing the start at the first place.
Measures like what, Dr. Abdul Wahab? Please give us a roadmap.
Well, actually, first of all, we have to be very aware about what to do and what not to do in forests. You know, the cigarette butts, the campfires, the barbecues, and the use of equipment that might, you know, cause sparks. All these kind of issues have to be taken into consideration. This is first of all. And actually, forest management is a very big science. And there are many things to be done to reduce the potential cause of fires, like removing all the dead trees, the dry branches, and all the rest of it. It's so expensive, but if we want to protect our fires, we have to do that. So forest management is very important. It has to be implemented, and it has to be put into plans and implementation. But if we go back to the root cause of what's happening, it's climate change. And climate change is man-made. It's not happening out of thin air, you know. All scientists have been predicting what's going to happen. And this has been, you know, taken place the past few decades. We are talking about tens of years of researches and warnings. And the problem is that the political leaders, they know the problem, they have the plans, they identified the objectives and the goals, but nothing is done on ground. Let me tell you something about that. Since 1990 until now, the emission of carbon dioxide increased by 60%. 60% increase in the emission of carbon dioxide, which is causing global warming, which has become climate change. So it is out of control now. The weather is not predicted. Like, for example, in Italy, in the north, there is floods and rains, and in the south, there is forest fires. So imagine in one country, two opposite weather patterns are taking place.
In a country that is known for its moderate weather. I mean, the change is huge. And the contrast is big. And we've been hearing for decades about, you know, global warming, climate change. Obviously, many took it lightly, but obviously we are seeing now there is no doubt. It's a no-doubter. It's something big must be done, as you said, Dr. Abdel Wahab, by political leaders and global leaders, and right away. Dr. Ayman Abdel Wahab, the international climate expert, thank you very much for your insight and your time, sir. Short break here, dear viewers, on Nile TV Newsroom Live, and the economic segment will be right after the break. Europe's main stock markets were sluggish in opening trade on Tuesday as London reported an increase in unemployment and several countries marked a public holiday. London's benchmark FTSE 100 index was down 0.4% compared with the closing level on Monday. In the Eurozone, Frankfurt's DAX 30 was up 0.1%, while the Paris CAC 40 was flat. The UK unemployment rate jumped to a two-year high of 4.2% for the 3 months to the end of June, compared to the previous 3 months, as the country grapples with high inflation and a cost of living crisis. Asian stock markets, in the meantime, wallowed at one-month lows on Tuesday, and the yuan struggled as China cut interest rates as another round of disappointing data underscored its economic malaise. Cuts to China's one-year loans to financial institutions at 15 basis points were the largest since the outset of the COVID pandemic. Industrial output and retail sales growth both slowed from a month earlier to a year-on-year pace of 3.7% and 2.5% respectively, missing expectations. The yuan dropped to its lowest in 9.5 months, and sources said that China's major state-owned banks stepped into the spot market to steady the currencies. The MSCI's broadest index of Asia-Pacific shares outside of Japan also edged down 0.1%. not far from a one-month low made on Monday, as worry about China's frozen property sector swept across regional markets. Property investment sales and fundraising extended their slide in July. The data on Tuesday showed new construction starts by floor area are down nearly 25% year on year, and highlight how there is neither the appetite nor funds to build. Forex now. Sterling rose on Tuesday after data showed British basic wages grew at a record pace, adding to the Bank of England's inflation worries, while the yuan sank to a 9-month low after China's central bank unexpectedly cut key policy rates for a second time in 3 months. In contrast, the Russian ruble initially firmed after Russia's central bank lifted its key interest rate by 350 basis points to 12% at an emergency meeting to try and halt the currency's weakening past 100 to the dollar after a public call from the Kremlin for tighter monetary policy. The pound was last 0.12% higher after rising as much as 0.28% following the data that came out from Britain that showed British wages, excluding bonuses, were 7.8% higher than a year earlier. That represented the highest annual growth rate since comparable records began in 2001. The UK unemployment rate, however, unexpectedly rose to 4.2% from 4.0%, with analysts flagging rising wages and unemployment would make it harder for the BOE to decide on future interest rate increases after 14 back-to-back rate hikes. Moving north, Swedish inflation remained unchanged in July at over 9% as central bank rate hikes have struggled to rein in rising prices. Consumer prices in the Scandinavian country rose by 9.3% year on year in July, the same as the month before. Rising mortgage costs also contributed 3.1 percentage points to the annual inflation rate, the statistics agency showed. Like its peers in the US and Europe, Sweden's central bank has repeatedly hiked its guiding rate in an effort to bring down inflation. Swedish inflation peaked in December at 12.3%, a more than 30-year high. Adjusted for fixed interest rates, inflation was 6.4% in July. The Riksbank, which hiked its key rate by 0.25 percentage points to 3.75% in late June, has a set target to keep inflation under 2%. For 2023 as a whole, the central bank expects the Swedish economy to contract 0.5% and has forecast unadjusted inflation of 8.9%. Moving east, Japan's economy grew much faster than expected in the April to June period as brisk auto exports and tourist arrivals helped offset the drag from a slowing post-COVID consumer recovery. Although global recession prospects cloud the outlook, the 6.0% annualized growth in Japan's economy translated into a quarterly gain of 1.5%, bringing GDP to a record high. It was the fastest expansion since the final quarter of 2020 and followed a revised 3.7% expansion in the January to March period. While the headline GDP data showed some relief to policymakers seeking to balance economic growth with sustainable inflation, it masks underlying weakness in the household sector. Private consumption, which makes up more than half of the economy, fell 0.5% quarter on quarter from April to June as price hikes hit sales of food and household appliances. Technology now, and Russia switched on the scientific instruments aboard its lunar lander, and scientists began processing its first data as the spacecraft sped towards the moon in a bid to be first to find ice on the Earth's only natural satellite. The Russian Luna 25 mission, the first since 1976, is racing against India, which launched its Chandrayaan-3 lunar lander last month to complete a soft landing on the moon's south pole, where scientists believe there are pockets of water ice. A Soyuz 2.1 rocket carrying the Luna 25 craft blasted off from the Vostochny Cosmodrome in Russia's Far East at 2:11 a.m. on Friday, Moscow time, and was boosted out of the Earth's orbit an hour later. Luna 25, roughly the size of a small car, will aim to operate for a year on the moon's south pole, where scientists at NASA and other space agencies in recent years have detected traces of water ice in the region's shadowed craters. There is much riding on the Luna 25 mission for Russia. If it succeeds, Russia is likely to say it shows that the West's sanctions over the Ukraine war cannot hold Russia back. But failure would again raise questions over Russia's space ambitions after the decades of superpower space competition with the US during the Cold War. US astronaut Neil Armstrong gained renown in 1969 for being the first person to walk on the moon, but the Soviet Union's Luna 2 mission was the first spacecraft to reach the moon's surface in 1959, and the Luna 9 mission in 1966 was the first to make a soft landing there. After the US won the battle to put a man on the moon, Moscow then focused on exploring Mars, and since the 1991 fall of the Soviet Union, Russia has not sent scientific probes beyond Earth's orbits. Sports now, and Olga Carmona struck late to lift Spain to a thrilling 2-1 win over Sweden on Tuesday and send the Iberians into a first Women's World Cup final. Carmona's 90th minute strike from long range pinged off the crossbar and into the goal 2 minutes after Rebecca Blomqvist had leveled the match for Sweden in front of a baying crowd of 43,000 plus at Eden Park. Salma Paraluelo, the quarter-final hero against the Netherlands, had put Spain in the lead with the opening goal in the 81st minute, breathing life into what had been a slow-burning, cagey affair. Less than a year after a player revolt tore the squad apart, La Roja will have the chance to lift the trophy on Sunday when they face either co-host Australia or England in the championship match. Australia and England are to re-engage one of the oldest and fiercest rivalries in sport when they meet with a place in the Women's World Cup final on the line at a sold-out stadium, Australia, on Wednesday. While England boasts the pedigree as twice World Cup semi-finalists and winners of the European title last year, Australia's Matildas have captured the hearts of a nation usually invested in other sports. Sydney's next two biggest stadiums will open their doors to allow ticketless fans to watch Wednesday's match on big screens, and the Prime Minister of Australia has all but promised a public holiday if the co-hosts lift the trophy on Sunday. And football megastar Mbappé was reinstated in Paris Saint-Germain's first team on Sunday. It has been a rocky build-up to the new Ligue 1 season for champions PSG, with both Mbappé and Neymar left out of new coach Luis Enrique's team for Saturday's underwhelming opening goalless draw against Lorient. After being sidelined for several weeks amid an ongoing contract dispute, Mbappé watched from the Parc des Princes stands, but the club's prized asset is now back in the fold for the time being at least. Meanwhile, Brazil forward Neymar is headed for Saudi Arabia after Pro League side Al Hilal agreed a 2-year deal with PSG. Saudi state media confirmed on Monday. Premier League now. Wolverhampton Wanderers were left aggrieved by a late penalty appeal that was turned down in their 1-0 loss at Manchester United on Monday. But new manager Gary O'Neill believes there were many positives in a contest his side largely dominated. Rafael Varane scored the only goal in their Premier League opener, but Wolves were convinced they should have had a spot kick deep in added time, which O'Neill insisted highlighted a grey area on how the video assistant referee is used. Not surprisingly, United manager Erik ten Hag had a different view of the incident, though he admitted his team were given an almighty scare in their Premier League opener. That is all for this week's edition of Nile TV's Newsroom Live. We hope you've enjoyed it. Next week, same time, is a new episode, God willing. Until then, this is Mohammed Abdurrahim.